All right, and welcome to episode one of going through Redwall, the first book, Redwall, by Brian Jacques. So we went through a couple weeks ago the books as an overview. So now we're going to be going through the books in more detail. This one I'll probably do the most detail on, only because it is the first book and it sets up a lot of the formula. And it may be true for maybe the first two or three, four books, um, as they continue to establish stuff. But in probably the later books, which kind of tend to fall more into a pattern, I probably won't do that as much unless it's a book that I really like or is um, hugely different, especially the later ones. So we'll see. And we'll see how long this takes. So I want to spend as much time with this series as possible. You could probably summarize these books a little bit way more than I could and much more easily, but um, I thought it'd be fun to go through them. So we're actually going to go through the first four chapters of Redwall. The thing with Redwall is it tends to be broken up into three books. So you'll have three books, and then the chapters will usually repeat. So it'll be chapters. You won't go like chap. You'll you won't have a full like 50 chapters. You'll have usually chapter two. Let's say a book two, right? So um, the first book is called The Wall. This is probably in reference to the fact that Redwall is a giant red wall. So um, the coming of Cluny against Redwall in the first books, in the first openings. So you have kind of what's happening on the inside and outside contrast, which is something I actually really like about um, the first couple chapters of the book. Is really kind of like the clear contrast that's going on between what's happening on the inside and what's happening on the outside. Now, of course, that's bound to be true because we're dealing with good and evil and different characters and what the evil characters are doing versus the good characters are doing. But I kind of like to set up it initially because, especially, um, and this is often true in the first couple chapters of most of Redwall, but it's specifically really well set up here is the stark contrast of kind of this joyous nature and this sweet, humble environment of the Abbey versus Cluny, who is clearly just pure evil. And I like the contrast, and there's some really great imagery and words play going on. So very well done. It actually opens with a uh, two things in the beginning. One, I actually read on the channel, the I Am That Is, which is the poem behind the Great Tapestry, and we'll get to that. And then a kind of like opening to kind of like the environment of what's happening, a description of Redwall and where it sits. A great sentence in that first opening was, where was it? The opening is a from above it resembled a fabulous dusky jewel fallen between green mantle of light silk and dark velvet. And so that's a really great description of Redwall and gives you a sense of like how special Redwall is. Because you have the light silk, which is supposed to be, it in the opening describes that there's meadowlands to the north, and on one side and to the west you have mossflower wood. So it's kind of caught in the middle of these two, and because of its red sandstone and the brightness of the sun coming in, it stands out like this red jewel among these two contrasts. So that's a really, really great description. I that that's one of the things that I think um, Red Brian Jakes is really good at flowery language. Maybe sometimes indulging a little too much, and definitely in some of the later books, I think it's not as good and kind of comes um, a little too over the top. But I think in the first couple books, it really works really, really well. I remember especially some of the descriptions in Matameo, this book, Mossflower, um, very, very good. So we get, of course, in the opening chapter, we have Matthias. He's walking along trips, and he's kind of a clumsy little mouse who kind of dreams of bigger things, right? And here he is being kind of uh, very gently being admonished by the abbot and basically telling him, we're mice of peace. And one of the things that kind of really stood out to me because of how many villains we get later come against Redwall in its legendarium is how, like, I don't know, the contrast in this was way starker than it kind of seems to fade away later. First off, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that it does appear like nearly all the Redwall mice within the Abbot order are all mice. They're not squirrels or hedgehogs. They all live on the outside, but they receive the benefits and the blessings of being near Redwall, but they're not real Redwall. Like Redwall is just mice, which is something that kind of goes away later. Um, in kind of just who can be an abbot, and I think Brian Jakes wanted to mix it up some so it didn't seem like it was just all mice. And initially probably why mice are such a big thing in the initial like 3, 4, 5 books of the series. But I think he wanted to play around more, so that will change. That's so this is kind of like both a looking at the book as it is, but also in retrospective of the whole Redwall series, it's really interesting. Reading this book already I saw so many things that I'm like, wow, that's such a contrast to kind of like the overall mythology of Redwall that kind of gets developed later. And some of this may just be because he's trying to keep things as simple as possible early on, and also it seems a bit um, more tight. Some of this will get looser as time goes on. So I think there's kind of that stark contrast into what the early books are doing versus what the later books are doing. But here it really works. It's and I like the description of just how peaceful Redwall is, considering how it gets attacked later. It's so funny. But I do like how in this um time, by this time, Redwall is just so established that he basically says, "Look, we're even even your vermin respect us." Basically, that's basically what it says in that speech he's giving about how peaceful and wonderful Redwall is. So, such an interesting opening to kind of just emphasize just how peaceful and well respected Redwall is. Like I kind of forgotten. It kind of feels forgotten that I thought Redwall was a bit more isolated than that, but no, this is saying that the legend of Redwall has gone beyond many walls, and the reason being was mainly because of of its just its reputation as being healers and caretakers and just kind mice in general. So that's kind of really kind of amazing to think about. So Matthias is I like Matthias here. It's I like that he's more clumsy and just not fit rather than him being kind of rebellious. Because we're going to see in chapter 3 him helping Alf with the grayling. So it's like he wants to be there and he's near there, but maybe that this just isn't, and we're going to see that later about, well, is he supposed to be this Redwall mice that that the Abbey wants him to be? Like, is that his role? He may be kind, he may even be helpful, but is that really supposed to be his role? And we're gonna see that. I think that's kind of where you get the sense that he has something more, he knows there's something more. He's satisfied with this life. I mean, he's being taken care of. The I had forgotten that the book had established she was an orphan. I had forgotten that bit because that's way more established in the animated series. The animated series does have a little bit of a background to Matthias, more established and more relating to Cluny and stuff. Um, which the animated series will get to at some point. But anyway, but kind of, but at least that he was not of this order, and so him already being outside, right? He's not of them really, right? He's an orphan. He's been taken in and taken care of, but he's not really of them, and so I think there's Brian Jakes is playing with that a bit too, as well. And then the other big thing in the first chapter that's really kind of stood out to me was kind of the peaceful mythology surrounding Martin, which, cause it really seems like this was just they want to make in contrast to when we get to Mossflower, you're gonna see this contrast. So I'm gonna read a little bit from here to set up so we get remember this for Mossflower later, which is where was it? Um, I know that Martin was a warrior, but those were days when strength was needed. He arrived here in the deep of winter when the founders were under attack from many foxes, vermin, and great wildcat. Uh, During the rout, fought a great battle against overwhelming odds. Merged broke for him, spent his last blood in combat. Martin was seriously wounded. He lay injured. They brought him back to the Abbey, and cared for his hurts until he regained his strength. And he was transformed, forsook the way of the warrior, and hung up his sword. All right, so uh, I just briefly ran through what that paragraph says. I just read some lines. Uh, don't know what copyright laws are on certain things and how much I want to read, but you got the basic gist, and that's gonna fly in the face of kind of some of how, how important Martin really is, what his role was, what the status actually was, because just the brought him back to the Abbey is going to be an important line because that's not going to be the case at all. There is no bringing back to the Abbey. So and it really does make it sound like the Abbey was under attack, which we're going to find out is not the case. So keep that in mind if you've not read Redwall before. So again, this is also why, in some ways, there's a tightness to this in terms of it just being a book, but in terms of where Brian Jacques will eventually go in a few places, it's gonna stand a little bit in contrast. Not super contrast, but there is gonna be, and so we see almost a peaceful mythologizing, which maybe is kind of what Brian Jacques was thinking. I don't know why why there's this difference there, and we'll get into it. But I think he's trying, but definitely if you look at it from like maybe an in-universe perspective of the books, that you're getting uh Mortimer's kind of fuzzy, kind of like fuzzy and very kind of slightly sanitized version of events, which is interesting. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Um, we're so I'm going to briefly talk about chapters 2 and 4 together because they're very short and they both involve Cluny. Cluny really is really well established. I like one of the things that kind of helps in this is like, so we've established kind of in the first chapter just how peaceful Redwall is and how respected it is. In this, it seems like he really wants to emphasize that Cluny really isn't a part of anywhere near this, that he is from almost another realm, right? That he is not like other rats, which is really interesting, especially considering, again, the vermin kind of stereotype we're going to get later, just how stark of a contrast, even among his own ranks, he really is. Now, of course, and it really seems like he's bringing together the worst of the worst, right? These aren't just your everyday rats. In this one, it seems very much more like rats from every corner that he could possibly, who are anywhere willing to join him in this evil quest. And him being the height of evil, him being called in the end of the second chapter, God of War, is a really, really great example of this. Cluny the Scourge also will be emphasized over and over again by his tail, which seems rather enormous, but is really kind of something that a lot of people don't think about with rats, especially if you've had pet rats and stuff with cold tails like I did. Uh, no tail at all that's been cold. Don't want to get really into that, but just kind of like how thick and disgusting a rat tail is, and that kind of thing kind of gets lost. So I really like the emphasis um, in this, and I kind of forgotten just really kind of how ugly Cluny is, um, and so it's really interesting. In this, we also just show like the beginning of this, just how far uh, Brian Jacques' language is willing to go with kind of disgusting nature of things. One is a reference to like he sees some rabbits playing in the field, right? And then he says, "Tasty dinner." And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, because especially if you know rabbits and hares later in the series, and they're fully sentient, it almost feels cannibalistic in a sense, even though they're completely different species. So there we go. Um, and then the other one is Skullface's death, where he just gets run over by the kicked off the horse, trying to get it to start again, because they're all in a cart basically, and the horse stops. He gets one of his minions to spook the horse again, so it'll keep going on, and gets thrown from the horse, lands, breaks, and then gets run over by the wheels. So there you go. Very, very gruesome imagery. There's a red mist imagery, broken bodies, so, and then a reference to hell. So very much, very much a kind of brutal opening. And then again, and then that wonderfully contrasts again in chapter 3, again, which is in between 2 and 4, of the feast and of the sumptuous food. One of the best things about the Redwall series is its description of food. So this is wonderful. We get a setup to Cornflower, who uh, set up with Cornflower. She's first mentioned, and we'll get to her later when she starts playing porn. But she catches Matthias's eye. She's the one that he finds pretty and attractive. Um, there are church mice that'll play a important role that get mentioned. There's a poor little family of church mice. So again, we're invoking kind of a, again, God versus evil kind of mentality. So we have the Abbey, and then we even have a church mice thing, and we have Tim and Tess, who are the picture of innocence because they're barely over being babes. They're like in human years, I think supposed to be like 3, 4, 5. So they're definitely like the picture of innocence, the sumptuous of the feast, how perfect the meal is, that the meal goes off basically perfectly. There's no like craziness going on other than Hugo just being fussy about everything. Well, Friar Hugo is like one of the best friars in the series. A friar will usually be a predominant character mentioned throughout the series. He's the main cook. In this one, it's Hugo, and Hugo's like a fat mouse. Forgetting if it said which kind of mouse it is, but he's like this pompous, kind of overly fat, squeaky little thing, and I love that. I love that absolute kind of contrast to that he's fat, but he has this squeaky high voice. Is It's really delightful. I like the contrast, and like just how even perfectly it's so perfect to the point that they catch, because Mortimer, Mort is it Mortimer or Mordalphus? Let's see here. It is. I'm trying to remember. Mortimer. Mordalphus. Uh, Mordalphus is later. I won't explain that. But Mortimer, taking the bite of the fish, and then the fish being perfect. Well, yeah, he had sent. What I was going to say was sent Matthias and brother Alf to go catch a grayling, and they present the grayling to Friar Hugo. It's this perfectly large grayling, and he had sent him to get a fish, but not necessarily grayling. And grayling is much larger. It's a 2-pounder. It's a perfect fish. And when Mortimer takes a bite out of it, uh, and puts it in his mouth, he declares it, so wonderful. And that's kind of where that chapter ends, is on a high of just everything is perfect, including the fish, which is the highlight of the feast. So, because the feast is in honor of Mortimer's golden anniversary, something like that, of being abbot. So it's this kind of golden age, and like golden, right? So it's a golden age of Redwall, and here it is about to be shattered, and it gets it's shattering because of Skullface. Skullface dies, and it's shattered, and so you kind of see that contrast, just how like one is shattered with cheers and rage, and one is shattered by death, and so there's a nice also contrast there. So there's the first 4 chapters. I think um it's actually really good. it's better than I remember. Redwall is one of those books I don't go back to because, in part, because I'm not a mouse guy. Strangely, I like mice, but I like unique mice and all sorts of stuff. I'm like not the biggest mouse guy, at least in Redwall. I'm like the mice tend to like just pop up so much, and there's just so many of them. It's hard to keep track sometimes. Um, but it actually is really well set up. The contrast is um, really well done, and it doesn't feel over the top heavy. Like you see where the setup is going, but um, it doesn't like Cluny is just like there's even a reference. He doesn't even see the sign to Redwall. There's a sign to Redwall that says 15 miles. And so the fact he doesn't even see or notice it or take note of it really tells you kind of like this is just something that's going to happen. That there's almost a sort of like inevitability to this, even if nobody involved is really aware, not even including himself. So it's kind of really interesting, and there'll be some fate stuff we'll get into and Destiny stuff later, of course. Being a book like this, it's important to remember this is 1986, so this is actually prior to I believe Harry Potter. I'm trying to remember when the first Harry Potter book came out. So the fact that we have kind of this young fate kind of thing is actually um, kind of not the standard yet. Harry Potter will kind of set the standard, but this is kind of before it. So it's kind of interesting noting that this kind of formula, at least within a more modern context, because of course, I mean, we've had Star Wars by this point, and some of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings feels a bit like this, and a bit of Narnia, but it kind of feels like there's been a gap at least since then, and this is, and of course, not necessarily in that kind of young adult novel yet phase of storytelling. So this is kind of an interesting, also kind of early trajectory of where that kind of stuff was going. But it's at least nice that it's also like with animals, right? That it's not uh people. But I will say from what it will seem like originally there is some of that, but I think the animals contrast stuff is something that also develops a bit more. This one is kind of a bit more straightforward because we're dealing with mice and they're kind of supposed to be just kind of this stand-in kind of creature. It doesn't feel as contrasty as it will get also later, where it feels like the those involved are a bit more animalistic. But that's not the case with some of them, and especially like Cluny the Scourge, of course. Uh, but yeah, so we'll get into that as well as kind of how animalistic also are we how substitutionary can we be, because this is definitely leaning more into just being kind of young adult action venture fantasy, so we'll get into that as well. But yeah, first four chapters pretty good. So next time we'll be going through a couple more chapters. I will see which ones. I was planning on doing just one and two, but the first two are pretty short, and I kind of want to at least get us in kind of like setup mode for this. Is there anything else in terms of just some basic overview to be aware of? So yeah, this is a great introduction to Redwall and the really great contrast between Matthias and Cluny and kind of the state of things in Redwall versus what's happening on the outside is a really, actually, really great contrast. It holds up better than I thought. It's actually pretty good. And Brian Jakes is always good at description. Some of his description narration, it can get a little overflowery, but some of that is just really great. And I'll read more of that next time. Maybe I'll even go back and read a couple highlights, especially if you have a favorite part in this first four chapters. Let me know. So yeah, if you have any feedback or interest or just things you want to talk about within the first four chapters, and we can bring those up next time, and or any just things you like, and I'll be sure to bring them up if you bring them up in the description. So like, subscribe, comment, and I will be more than happy to talk about what you like, especially in these opening chapters about Redwall. So until next time, it's Badgers and Bells. Ring them. It's Redwall. Bye.